CTBK gives executives and owners of mid-market businesses unparalleled confidence and clarity so you can focus on strategic objectives and organizational success. Their multidisciplinary advisors, accountants, and team members have a wealth of experience and are all available and responsive to each client to ensure the most effective advice, actions, and outcomes no matter the situation or complexity level. That experience base and one-team approach, combined with integrated and efficient way of operating, enable them to be truly proactive partners, doing the best thing for their client every time. Visit ctbk.com or call 716-630-2400 to learn how CTBK can work for you.
This is Charles Barkley, and you're listening to Tim Graham and Friends.
Welcome to Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants. I'm Tim Graham of The Athletic, here with Jonah Bronstein of Bronstein Sports Plus. We have a lot to get to today, a rare Saturday posting. But with the holidays and various things going on away from the podcast, away from regular duties, things have made scheduling this a little bit difficult for Jonah and me, but here we are. And also a good day to do it, I think, because the Sabres played last night. We had a couple of chances where we could have podcasted, but the Sabres were playing that night, and maybe that was going to change things. The narrative being, the 13-game losing streak, hate watching, which I think has its own pleasures. As I was at some holiday parties during that 13-game losing streak, and people were switching over from the NFL games to the Sabres game because they were riveted by the debacle. And now they've won a couple of games, 13 goals in their last two games, with a couple of wins heading into their game tomorrow at St. Louis. But I want to start out with the Bills. They're playing the Jets. As everyone knows, the Bills locked into that number 2 or 3 seed. There's some things happening in these Saturday games as we're recording. I'm not exactly sure how it'll shake out by the end of the night and what that means about who the Bills would play, if this or if that. But they're not going to get the number 1 seed. We know that. Kansas City Chiefs earned that with their record. Jonah, I guess we'll just briefly start about this Jets game, and then I want to get into the No. Let's not talk about the Jets game. Maybe we'll talk about that later. I want to talk about the Josh Allen-Lamar Jackson MVP debate. And before people hit the X button or decide to listen to another podcast, Jonah and I don't think are about to debate who's going to win it or who should win it. What I want to talk about is the debate itself. And every time that I turn on social media and take a look and dare and deign to click on a thread of somebody having a discussion about Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen for the MVP, I regret it almost immediately. So much whining from the fan bases, and that's Josh Allen fans too. That's Lamar Jackson fans. Just so much whining about their man. We need our man to be identified as the best. And I've been on record. I've called Josh Allen the MVP in my stories at The Athletic, probably for the last month and a half. I think maybe even in the opener, I wrote about how he made an emphatic MVP statement with his first performance of the season, Jonah. But if Lamar Jackson wins another MVP award, it is not an affront to mankind. It is not a snub. It is not an insult to Josh Allen. I mean, it's possible. And Steve Young used to use this analogy when he was back on ESPN as an analyst, and people would try to say, who's better, Brady or Manning? And Steve Young would say, when you go into an art museum, are you comparing the Van Goghs to the Picassos? Can't we just enjoy these guys for what they are? Do we have to pick one? Now, granted, that's what the MVP is. Anyway, I just find the whole thing unbecoming. And it's the debate culture. But anyways, the debate itself is exhausting and obnoxious.
Yeah, I mean, I think it should be something to appreciate, having multiple MVP candidates and Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson and Saquon Barkley all having career years. Jared Goff throwing for all the yards that he's had for a team that's going to have the best record in the league. Patrick Mahomes probably not having an MVP caliber season by his standard, but all of the late wins and fourth quarter comebacks that he's had MVP type moments often. I think a lot of it is just a symptom of sports debate culture, the television shows that are most popular and on the air most, and how social media has picked up on that. And even, the barroom conversations, maybe you always had these, but now I think they've intensified as to who should be the MVP, who's your vote, when
People are
none of
taking
us
it
really have these
personal,
votes.
though. It seems I mean, there's something about this particular debate, maybe because it involves a Buffalo guy and we cover Buffalo sports, but it just seems so personal.
Yeah,
Like among the people who are arguing, they are so wrapped up into it.
yeah, the Bills fans, and I've even seen, quotes from the players throughout this week, seem to be taking it very personal that Josh Allen's being slighted. First of all, the votes hasn't happened yet, and I think Josh Allen, I would probably vote for him for the MVP. There's still 2 weeks of the season left to figure some things out, but I think his value to the Bills and the performance he's had and the way he's improved in certain aspects of his game and some of the injuries that he's played through, he's definitely had an MVP caliber season, but he's had MVP caliber seasons before. Statistically, Lamar Jackson has been better in some ways, maybe has had a better season individually, but his team doesn't have quite as many wins, even though they did beat the Bills. I think it's interesting with Josh Allen that he's probably the MVP favorite, but maybe not a contender for Offensive Player of the Year and probably not first team All-Pro quarterback, but his value has maybe been higher than his most outstanding level of play, at least by the numbers. My frustration with the MVP conversation is how long we've been having it and how many times somebody won the MVP.
I'm guilty of
Yeah.
adding to this, Jonah. You can go ahead. I get it. I've been writing stories about Josh Allen as the MVP for a month and a half.
Yeah, well, the MVP will be voted on after week 18. And so there's 2 weeks left in the regular season. There was a lot of giving the MVP to Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson at various points in times in November. And there were still games to be played. And at the end of the season, the MVP is often given to the best player on the best team. Probably won't be given to Patrick Mahomes this year. So you're going to go down the line a little bit to some teams that have really good records, but not the best record. And that has to shake out. If for some reason the Bills collapsed and lost these next 2 games and Baltimore has a better record than the Bills, then I think that changes the MVP vote a lot more than any 48-yard run that Lamar Jackson had on Christmas or a fourth down run that Josh Allen had last month. It's the overall body of work. And I do think now, because we're so close to the end of the season and week 18 might be meaningless for a lot of the teams, now is a appropriate time to really begin having these MVP conversations and sorting out the contenders. But a month ago was too early. And a month ago, deciding that it was over with and that a certain player was the MVP was way too early. And I think that's what's maybe led to some of the grievance that Josh Allen was the MVP and now it's been taken away from him. And the other part of it from the Bills fan perspective is that a lot of people think Josh Allen should have been the MVP last year because he had better stats than Lamar Jackson, but
Let's
he
talk
clearly
about
wasn't.
that.
He
Because
wasn't. I mean, you've
I
made
think
this
that
point
speaks
before, but yeah, go ahead.
I think that speaks to both of your points when you talk about last year. For the record, I do not have a vote for the Associated Press version of the MVP award. I am a member of the Pro Football Writers Association. I do vote in that version of the award. And last year, my vote was for Lamar Jackson. Now, and that's where I'll say, Jonah, where you talk about how the middle of the season or beginning of the season, you should wait until the end of the season and then decide. But it doesn't work out that way. It's much like the AP rankings or the seedings for football, right? If you are determined to be the best team in the country before games have even been played and you hold on to it, then you ride that, even though you might not be the best. You might not be the second or third best team in the country, but because you were ranked very highly while you were playing non-conference games, then you kind of are put there until you're knocked off. And it's not and it is so there's that aspect of it. Then there's also the, what have you done for me lately? And there is, these are human beings voting for this award. And you do probably get, again, to use another sport like the boxer, at the end of the round, if you get the flourish in the last 20 seconds of the round, like Sugar Ray Leonard against Marvin Hagler, the judges are going to give you the round. But Josh Allen lost last year's MVP, regardless of the stats at the end of the year. He lost it because of what happened in the first half of the season. for the first 2 months of the season, Josh Allen looked lost. The entire Bills offense looked lost. We were writing about what happened to these guys. And eventually, Ken Dorsey got fired. So you had an offense that was bad enough that their play caller got axed. And then to say Josh Allen deserved an MVP when the offense was missing for the first 2 months of the season, I think, that's hard. That's hard. It's it's hard to square that circle. And so I think that you do get a feeling in the minds of the voters, and that's why I think Josh Allen will probably win it. Is I think you do kind of make up your mind as the season goes on, unless you are just totally robotic in your thinking. And yeah, I'm sure that there are some voters who are going to, take a look at it all when the season's over and their spreadsheets and whatever it takes or however they weigh, whether it be wins or stats and the whole thing, or whatever's in their MVP voting casserole, and they're going to decide. But these are also people who've been covering and following football throughout the season. So you do get kind of lured into a certain way. My vote as of now would be for Josh Allen. We only have 2 meaningless games left. Yes, the Ravens have a little more to play for than the Bills do. I think Josh Allen has earned it from the beginning of the season until now. Again, that's just my opinion. And I stated, again, I voted for Lamar Jackson last year. I did not think Josh Allen deserved it last year. And I also will say this, just regarding the debate, I don't see it as you mentioned Saquon Barkley already. Lamar Jackson might not, you can make a case. I don't necessarily agree with this point, but you can make a case that Lamar Jackson isn't the MVP of his own team. Derrick Henry's pretty freaking good. And the Bills don't have a weapon like that. And Lamar Jackson's got this guy who on his team and his backfield that's doing amazing things. And yet they've lost more games than the Bills. Anyway, that's a reasoning. We're going back. I don't want to get in the argument of who versus one versus the other, but more it's the discussion. And I don't know, is there a way to fix that? Like they've tried to manipulate AP poll rankings too. Let's start them later. We're not going to have any rankings until X number of games have been played, all these types of things. But is there something that can be done?
I don't think there's a way to fix it because
They
it's
are
really
voting more this year, though. I just want to say for the record, you are voting now for 5, I think.
Yeah.
You're ranking the top 5 instead of just picking your number 1 or 2, whatever it was. You're voting for more people. So it will matter of how many first, second, and third place votes you get as opposed to just being on the ballot.
It's a media and fan driven situation. I don't think it's the AP voters or the process of selecting the AP that is the MVP that is causing this. It's really just the nauseating part of it is the horse race coverage and the week to week changes in opinion and discussion and having it go way too early when none of that matters. Who was the MVP after week 11 or how these bar graphs, changed, plotted throughout the season. It matters at the end of the season when the voters cast their votes and what the whole season meant and things like that. And, it's a situation where both of them deserve to be MVP. And even, you mentioned Barkley, Jared Goff, some other players probably deserve it as well. But if we're narrowing it down to these 2 quarterbacks, it's 2 bona fide MVP candidates. And, it's kind of like the presidential election. You can't go wrong with either one. Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, they both would have been great presidents. It doesn't matter who you pick. And in this case, the MVP is going to be the MVP. And I don't think there's a lot of shame in coming up second to the MVP. I think there's a lot of Bills fans that are disappointed. I saw a quote from Thurman Thomas that he was saying how much of a travesty it's been that Josh Allen has not been considered for the MVP before when he's already been a runner-up and he's been a finalist 3 times. So he has been in MVP consideration before. I think if I was casting a vote, I would strongly consider Josh Allen for the season he's had and the effect he's had on the Bills, the changes in the Bills roster and how that put more burden on Josh Allen's shoulders and how he rose to the occasion with that, extra responsibility and extra need for him to be even better than he had been before. But Josh Allen has played at an MVP level for most of the past 4 or 5 seasons, and he doesn't have an MVP yet. Now, maybe this isn't how you're supposed to evaluate it in a single season award, but I just don't think that Lamar Jackson should get his 3rd MVP before Josh Allen gets his 1st. I think they've been pretty much equals over these past few years, and that should be narrowed out. But I think it's also going to be interesting that, we're probably going to get a second round playoff matchup that's going to be the Bills against the Ravens, and the two top MVP candidates playing it out. And the votes will already have been cast, but we might really learn who is the most valuable player in the league in that game, whether the votes track with that or not.
Well, that's the human element of it, Jonah, and I think that does play heavily in it. Josh Allen doesn't have one yet. You take a look at, there's all kinds of examples with the National Basketball Association and their MVPs, right?
Yeah.
About, the guys who didn't, when it wasn't Jordan, it was just because they felt like they wanted to give it to somebody else because Jordan probably was the MVP that year too. So yeah, there's some of that. That's not to say that Josh Allen wouldn't deserve it. But then there's also what's in the voters' minds too of Lamar Jackson's postseason performances, which shouldn't matter, or your body of work should not matter, but it does when it comes to casting a ballot. I don't think that every voter is going to be like Aaron Schatz and just go strictly by whatever metric and number that he has. It's not going to be specifically by an analytic viewpoint. There is a lot that goes into it. And I'm guessing probably some people who vote for the award don't take much time to even write. They might just jot it down. Now, who knows? I mean, there's nobody looking over your shoulder to see how you're picking this award. And, you can, take 5 seconds to fill out your MVP ballot or 5 days or whatever. But, yeah, it's the discussion itself is tiring. And here we are, haven't been talked about it for now a half hour or whatever it's been.
And also, I think only one time since 2000 or something like that has the MVP won the Super Bowl. I mean, that's not exactly something that correlates, but it is something, it's not the most meaningful thing for a football player. And there does seem to be, if not a curse, a little bit of a, the player who wins the regular season doesn't necessarily win the postseason. Patrick Mahomes did it a couple years ago and kind of broke that trend. But, I think most Bills fans would rather see Josh Allen winning the Super Bowl MVP than the regular season MVP. And if he happens to be the MVP and accepting that award at the NFL honors while the Bills season is over, I don't think that's going to be a really enjoyable situation for the Bills fans in the way that they're hoping it plays out.
It's the Coach of the Year award too. It's amazing how it shouldn't Bill Belichick have pretty much won it every year, but he didn't. It usually goes to they add a lot of context. They slather on context when it comes to the Coach of the Year award, and I think there's a lot of context that goes with the MVP award too. I think Josh Allen's going to get a lot of credit for not having Stephon Diggs and all the players that were gone, the captains, the leadership, even if you want to go on the defensive side of the ball. But that storyline heading into the season that the Bills were going to have to take a step back, and here, lo and behold, because of Josh Allen, they won the division faster than any other time since they started their streak. There was a point I was going to make there regarding what was it, Jonah? The point you just made.
Coach of the Year. I think.
Coach of the Year. Coach of the Year. Yeah. I'm sorry, I got sidetracked. Yeah, Coach of the Year. Vince Lombardi won Coach of the Year once. Kevin Stefanski has won it twice. Chuck Knox won it 3 times, I think. There are. It's amazing. The Coach of the Year award goes to usually the best turnaround. First year, you get a lot of first year coaches win Coach of the Year. Mike Smith going back to the Atlanta Falcons when both he and Tony Sparano, people were arguing if the Wildcat Dolphins deserved, if Tony Sparano deserved it, and he ended up losing out for Coach of the Year to Mike Smith, another first year coach who turned around the Atlanta Falcons. Anyways, Brian Dable winning Coach of the Year, and now people want him run out of town on a rail in New York. It 3 years ago, 2 years ago, he won Coach of the Year. Dick Duran was a Coach of the Year with the Chicago Bears.
Not in Buffalo.
Not in Buffalo. No, that did not happen in Buffalo. It happened when he was in Chicago, but what a delight.
Have the Bills ever had a Coach of the Year? Chuck Knox, maybe? Chuck Noll? Not Chuck Noll.
Chuck Knox, I think I don't know if he was with the Bills. I remember he had one with Seattle. Let me look that up. Was Marv ever Coach of the Year? I'm guessing he was.
I think no, but I don't know that for a fact.
Let's take a gander real quick. He was not the AP Coach of the Year. He had won some of the other Coach of the Years like Sporting News and UPI, but not the what is now known as the Standard. All right, let me look that up. Hey, folks, we're also going to talk some college basketball coming up. So we got St. Bonaventure off to a 12-1 start. They've been incredible. UB women are undefeated at 11-0. They just won again this afternoon, and they're on the verge of Mid-American Conference play. Please subscribe to us. Jonah and I know we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but Jonah and I are going to try to do some live versions of this podcast. And if you want an alert as to when that's starting, you'll need to be a subscriber. So subscribe on YouTube, subscribe, like, do whatever on your various platforms of choice, whether it be Spotify, Amazon, iTunes, NFL Coach of the Year. Comment, like, do all that good stuff, please. We'd like to interact with you that way. Don Shula won it 4 times, of course. That makes sense. Chuck Knox. Yes, Chuck Knox did win it with the Bills, 1980. And that was his second. And then he won it 4 years later, his third with the Seattle Seahawks. Bill Parcells won it twice. Andy Reid, I think, has won it only once. Jason Garrett won it. Matt Nagy won it. Mike Vrabel won it. All these people got fired. Ron Rivera won it twice. Ron Rivera won it twice in a 3-year span with Carolina. Bill Belichick won it 3 times. That gem Marvin Lewis has won. Marty Schottenheimer has won. Jim Haslett has won. Dom Capers, Ray Rhodes. I mean, these aren't Wayne Fonts. Lindy Infante has a Coach of the Year award. Holy smokes. Lindy Infante, 1989 with the Green Bay Packers. Holy. Jack Patera has one. You know Jack Patera.
I know Ken Patera.
Hey, you know who this? I see this guy on the list here. Ted Marchibroda. Ted Marchibroda, he won Coach of the Year with the Baltimore Colts in 1975. Now, he was on the staff, Super Bowl III. He was the inaugural coach of the Baltimore Ravens. He was, behind the K-Gun offense as the offensive coordinator for Jim Kelly in the late 80s, going into the Super Bowl run. He's in the Ring of Honor in Indianapolis. He went to St. Bonaventure. He was on St. Bonaventure's last football team. He is not in the Greater Buffalo Sports Hall of Fame. I went looking up something on him recently, and because of the story I did on Detroit, the connections between Buffalo and Detroit, because he went from St. Bonaventure to, I think he went to a school in Detroit, or he played for the Lions briefly. Anyways, I was looking up the tie-in between, he went from St. Bonaventure. He transferred to Detroit, which is now the University of Detroit, which is now Detroit Mercy. And I thought, okay, there's another connection. And I went looking him up in the Greater Buffalo Sports Hall of Fame, and he wasn't in there. And neither's Jack Butler, who's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He also was a teammate of Ted Marchibroda on that last St. Bonaventure football team. Seems like an omission, huh?
I would think he should be in there. I do wonder how many Bills assistant coaches are in the Greater Buffalo Sports Hall of Fame, but
he was an NFL head coach who went to St. Bonaventure and won Coach of the Year.
Mostly for his assistant coaching accolades, and is also this week honored by the Pro Football Hall of Fame with a contributors award that he's going to get this summer.
Jonah, you froze up on us.
Yeah, you froze up on me. I thought you were just making a funny face and thinking. I was wondering what was coming after that.
Yeah, there's probably aren't many assistant coaches, but he was an NFL Coach of the Year. He a legendary coach in Baltimore for both the Colts and the Ravens. K-Gun, and the K-Gun. It's the K-Gun. I mean, that's an iconic phrase around these parts. And was quarterback at St. Bonaventure. Anyway.
I'll tell you, in the Coach of the Year discussion, because I was just looking things up while we were stalling and looking other things up. Lindy Ruff has won the Jack Adams Trophy once. Ted Nolan won the Jack Adams Trophy once. But John Tavares has never been coach of the year in the NLL. Now, he's only been the Bandits coach for about 5 seasons, but they've been 5 great seasons. And I think he falls into that category where the Bandits are expected to be great every year, so he doesn't get enough credit for
Yeah.
coaching the team. But, he should probably get that award one of these years. And, I would feel more aggrieved that he's not been coach of the year than Josh Allen not being MVP. The Bandits have all the MVP awards, though. They have 2 MVPs, and they go back several years with their run of MVP trophies.
Yeah, you're expected to be good, and that's what hurts Andy Reid and Bill Belichick. Those guys should have been probably alternating for almost 2 decades. Even Andy going back to Philadelphia, he had some great seasons there. And Kevin Stefanski has won 2 of the last 4. All right. It's
I'm
also
hoping to
why
win fantasy football coach of the year this year. Hopefully I'm in the running for that.
are you in the final this week?
Oh, I'm in the final. I'm winning by a lot of points and think
Who are
I'm
you
going to win the
competing
league.
against?
Well, that's the funny thing because you know how our league works, where there's the 2 different leagues and the Super Bowl at the end. So I'm against Dom Tibbetts from Channel 7. I'm winning by a pretty big margin in our league championship, and I think I'm going to win that. Yahoo says 93% chance going into the weekend. But I have to compete with the champion of the other league. I don't know who's on the teams, but I do know Alex Brasky from the Batavia Daily News has Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, who I also have on my team. So there's similarities and crossover there. So I don't know how well he's probably having about as good of a week as I am. I don't know how that's going to shake out for the big prize, but I've made some key pickups, some key choices with my defense. I think even if I don't win the title, I think I've had a coach of the year performance through this postseason.
I did not make the playoffs. I lost on a tiebreaker, so my record was I don't know if I was 7-6 or 6-7. We had a very on our side of the conference standings. We had a pretty mediocre. Oh, I'm in your conference, right?
Yep.
Yeah, we were in the same side. Yeah, we were all muddled up there in the middle, and I also had one of the lowest scoring teams in the league. But in the Elmos League, we weren't supposed to have a league this year. And I just learned that I'm in the championship with Lisa Connolly, and it auto drafted for us. We weren't supposed to have a league, and then about 2 months in, somebody said, "Hey, are we doing? There's games are being played." And then so a handful of us actually, but we weren't allowed to do anything with our rosters, and so I auto drafted a championship team, apparently, or I should say Yahoo drafted a championship caliber team for me several months ago. And so we're for funsies. I'm in the championship.
Yeah, this is going to be
Just goes to show how random this shit is, right? Like
it is.
This was auto drafted a championship team.
Fantasy football drives me nuts the way the playoff structure works and the way things, shake out at the end of the season with injuries and meaningless games and how that changes, where all the money is decided. It doesn't really determine who had the best team all year. Because I've had a lot of good regular seasons, but this will be, assuming I can pull this off and hold on, this would be my first fantasy football championship since 1994.
Whoa.
Yeah, I remember playing with my dad. We had a co-managed team, and we had Emmett Smith, Troy Aikman, Michael Irvin, Rodney Hampton.
You should call up some of those guys and do a sentimental piece, do a nostalgia piece. Maybe have Sean Kirst double byline it with you. And you could track some of those guys down and walk down memory lane.
I think it would be more interesting to go through all the players that let me down when I was the number 1 seed, and then week 16 came around and I got swept out of the playoffs.
A team that would love to be swept out of the playoffs if given the opportunity, the Buffalo Sabres. I think they would just, if they could find a way to get into the postseason, that would be a miracle in and of itself. Jonah, you were at the game last night. They are playing loose. They're scoring goals. Now they're also doing it against, last night at least, one of the worst teams in the NHL. And I have a tweet here from Ryan Whitney, who after the second period said the Blackhawks this was the first period, after the game in KeyBank Center. First period intermission, Ryan Whitney tweets, the Blackhawks just played the worst period of hockey in the NHL I've ever seen, and I played on the 2010-2011 Edmonton Oilers. So it's not as though the Buffalo Sabres are clicking against contenders, but at this point, it's got to feel good in that dressing room just to be able to go out and have fun, score goals, have some things look like they're working, and describe it to me. And it looked like the arena was jumping. It
Well,
looks like the
right.
fans were having fun.
I think that was the biggest takeaway is it was a feel-good win for the fans, something that I think they really needed because even though that winless streak ended Monday night on Long Island, the Sabres had still lost their past 7 home games and needed to take care of business against an inferior team and have a good game. So, they're singing songs, they're doing the wave. It was a announced sellout, the first one since the season opener. You didn't see any inflatable palm trees or fans with paper bags on their head or booing or calling for anybody to get fired. So there was a lot of, easing the fan discontent, which I don't think is completely gone away. I think there's a lot of
No.
disappointment that this team is where they are in the
You
standings.
listen to WGR after a Bills win and their fans calling in saying that McDermott's got to go. So
Sure.
you know that there's a lot of people that aren't just pacified after 2 wins.
Yeah, but right. But the social contract of a professional sports team of giving the home fans, their money's worth and something to cheer for and feeling like going to the game was worthwhile. The Sabres hadn't really been doing that for a long time, and they got to do that. And then that feeds back into the players. I think the players really appreciated being able to play a good game for the home fans, not have to stand in the locker room and explain while they're playing poorly at home. Because this goes back multiple seasons, even when they were a better team a couple years ago, record wise, they had a poor home record. So I just think playing well at home, even though it was against a bad team that had to travel in the morning and that probably really contributed to why they played poorly in the first period, the Blackhawks. And, there was a point in that game where it got to 4-2 and the Blackhawks got a power play in the third period. And it looked like the Sabres were maybe collapsing again and being able to get that goal with Alex Tuch coming out of the penalty box. Alex Tuch himself being a player who hadn't scored in a home game in a very long time. And the player who was most often the one that had to stand up in the locker room and explain the losses. So for him to have a hat trick and not the winning goal, but kind of the put away the game goal, there was just a lot of cleansing of the soul, cleansing of the spirit for the Sabres fans. Because even if they had lost that game, now they go on the road, they still have all these home losses in a row. I think they would have been right back into that sunken place that they were in with the winless streak, even though they had broken that the other night, because that would have looked like a really fluky performance. Rasmus Dahlin coming back now and looking like an all-star, and 6 assists in his past 2 games and really controlling the play. And there's some remarkable numbers of how well the Sabres have played in 5-on-5 situations with him on the ice the past 2 games. And it's looking like maybe he was playing hurt, a lesser version of himself earlier in the season. So, it was way too early to think the Sabres, or way premature to think the Sabres are back in playoff contention, but they're now back to that team they were a month ago where they're competitive and night in and night out. You think you can get a good performance out of them.
Maybe they can
Hopefully.
channel whatever happened out in California when they swept the Kings, Ducks, and Sharks what feels like forever ago, because the Sabres are about to go on a 4-game road trip that starts tomorrow afternoon at St. Louis. Not
Well, let
only
me
is
ask you this.
Yeah.
If we could talk about this or get your opinion, do they still need to make a big move? That was the big talking point through the winless streak, that something needed to happen. They needed to shake up the lineup, bring in some new blood or a new player that could change their fortunes. Now that they're playing well in these past 2 games and scoring all these goals, do they need more to make a push? Are they too far out of it to make a move
the
like that?
Islanders are a lot better team than the Blackhawks, and yes, that game was on Long Island, so they did that on the road, and then they come home, and then they broke that streak too against Chicago, one of the worst teams. They just, it's when Chicago, haven't they fired their coach? I get Detroit.
Yeah, interim coach.
Detroit and Chicago both. I mean, it's no, I need to. I'm going to need to see more. I'm not saying again. This next couple of weeks are going to be pretty telling, I think. Not only is it a 4-game road trip, 5 of the next 6 and 9 of the next 13 are on the road. So this is going to be a tough stretch. You were saying before we even started, and I didn't know this about their schedule, but there are no, like when you have travel involved and all that stuff, they don't have days off, really. I mean, it's hard to find a breather in there.
Lindy said at the beginning of the season that they might not practice through all of January. I mean, I think he was being a little bit facetious, but he was saying the schedule sets up to where they're not going to practice very often at all through the month of January.
Well, let's see how they respond here. I think that the season's shot. 13-game losing streaks don't happen to good teams. They it seems to happen to Buffalo more than any other team. I think I saw that they're the only team since this in the salary cap era that's had 13-game losing streaks. No other teams had anything like that happen to them. And the salary cap era goes back a long ways. It's
I think
not
the
just
rest of the NHL combined has had something like 3 or 4.
it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. But yeah, good teams. Yeah, it's I think their season's shot. They're looking at, they're already on 20, they should be 25, 26. Making moves for that. I don't know. And if that's what they're doing, then I guess you don't need to make a trade now because you got to be prudent. You can't just give your players away. But their backs are against the wall from a personnel standpoint. Yeah, I don't know. They don't know. They got a plan. They're hoping it works. They have no idea if it's going to work.
See, I think Kevin Adams still should be trying to make a move, utilizing the cap space and the picks and the prospects and those resources. Maybe not the big shakeup move of trading someone like Dylan Cousins or a key player right now to get a different player in, but do a little more to match the fan desperation for trying to make the playoffs and say we did everything we could to make this run. It should have happened a month ago, but maybe make it now. But they're so far out of it in the standings that probably won't be enough. There probably isn't a trade out there that can really close that gap and make that difference. It might be a little bit reckless for the future of the franchise, but it seems like for the spiritual health of the franchise that I think they need to do something to make it seem like, they're desperate to make the playoffs, as desperate as the fan base is for the rest of the season.
Sabres fans want a big move. A lot in the media. People who cover the team want a big move. But if you do want a big move, if you're a Sabres fan who needs a splash, who needs something to catch people's attention, do you want Kevin Adams making that trade? That's the other part.
Okay,
the guy who the reason they need this move that you want is because of the guy who's going to be trying to make the move to fix it. It's a catch-22.
Yeah, but I don't know if Kevin Adams has been fleeced in too many or any of the trades he's made. His weakness is probably being
the vision,
not aggressive enough, not making enough trades or a big enough trade, and being maybe a little bit too careful. But by being careful, he's made mostly good trades. They've been marginal additions and things like that. But even trading away Jack Eichel and Sam Reinhart, it seems like he got pretty good value. But he hasn't made the trade that's really made the difference yet.
St. Bonaventure doesn't seem to make any trades or need to make any trades.
But they got a GM.
Right. They got a GM. And look, to be 12-1 in the transfer portal era out of St. Bonaventure, we had Mark Schmidt on here over the summer, and we talked about it. It was right before they added Adrian Wojnarowski, and I don't even think at the time Mark had any idea that was going to be happening, right? I mean, there was no sense. Like maybe they'd had some discussions.
He had an idea, but he didn't know that Woj had made that decision himself yet.
Right, and it was still a ways away. I mean, but in that ballpark. It was over the summer. And Mark Schmidt we were talking about how schools like St. Bonaventure become farm teams for the better schools. And it's hard to keep finding players and the turnover. And Mark Schmidt was even saying, if I had to start this profession all over again, I wouldn't do it because this isn't what I'm in it for. And I even asked him the question, will it shorten your career, do you think? And he said, yes, probably, because it's not as enjoyable as it used to be. And then here's St. Bonaventure at 12-1. So whatever it was that he was anxious about, aggravated about, Mark Schmidt's now coaching a 12-1 roster. Jonah, you've been down there. You've gone to, how about this? Carl Jones was asking me about this, your teammate at Channel 4. And what is the dateline? At St. Bonaventure.
We don't have time for this. We don't have time for this.
It should be St. Bonaventure, right? And yeah, I think that even the paper in Olean uses St. Bonaventure.
That's also what St. Bonaventure asks you to use or requests because they have their own mailing address, and St. Bonaventure itself is its own postal code, I guess.
But a postal code doesn't matter. It's the town.
Yes, yes.
Is
Now
it its own town?
the Buffalo News uses Allegheny because if you look at the map and you're from that area, you kind of understand that it's right on that border of Allegheny and Olean, and that's, geographically the correct way to do it. The AP, and this was a big discussion years ago when St. Bonaventure was ranked in the top 25 and we had to do these date lines, and the AP said to use Olean because that was the I don't call it a major city, but the closest town that anybody outside of Allegheny County had ever heard of, and that it might be confusing or unknown to people outside of Western New York where it's coming from, and that people know St. Bonaventure as being in Olean, even that technically it's on the border and outside Olean. So the Associated Press uses Olean. I follow AP style when I'm writing for the AP and for WIBB and things like that. So I will use Olean in my date lines, but I think Allegheny is also correct. And St. Bonaventure is also correct, but I don't like to use that because then I think like every college and every high school and everything else is just, I mean, I've seen Niagara University use that as their date lines, and I think that's incorrect.
Right.
So I would not want to use that.
If St. Bonaventure is an incorporated town, then that would be accurate. If it's just a post office, I think that's inaccurate. I think and I could probably get my Associated Press style guide out, but it has nothing. The postal code has nothing to do with it because so when I lived in the town of Tonawanda, I had a Buffalo mailing address. That didn't, so if something happened, if a plane crashed on Fayette Avenue, right behind St. Joe's High School where I lived, the date line should have been town of Tonawanda, not Buffalo, because shouldn't have anything to do with your postal address.
Yeah. And I don't like, as a writer, you run into that situation where if your dateline says St. Bonaventure, then you kind of can't lead with St. Bonaventure because you have the same word back to back, and that gets kind of awkward. So I think the Olean kind of satisfies that a little bit. There's a lot of that around here covering high schools. Neither of the Kenmore high schools are actually in Kenmore, but you'll see Kenmore datelines used to that. None of the Williamsville high schools are in Williamsville, but you see Williamsville datelines used for that. So there's some peculiarities with that, but I kind of agree with the AP standpoint, especially when it's going out on the wires. That's where people know, if they even know, that St. Bonaventure is located in Olean, and that's even though it's across the block or across the street, the next block over, that makes sense to the world at large, that's what the dateline should be.
I'm looking at the actual dateline rules in the Associated Press style guide.
I will say this. I like this story. I don't know if anybody else is going to find it as amusing as I do, and I'm not going to use some names, but I was covering the St. Bonaventure team when they were ranked in the top 25 a couple years ago. Covered the first game. There was all this back and forth with the AP desk over what dateline we should use. They settled on Olean. Game 2 comes around. A new photographer shows up, asks me, hey, what dateline should I use? A Buffalo News writer chimes in, says to use Allegheny, says, I write for the Buffalo News, and I'm correct. And I had to mention this photographer said, don't listen to the Buffalo News. You will be wrong if you do what the Buffalo News tells you. And the Buffalo News representative did not appreciate that, but I had to instruct the AP staffer to follow the AP style, right or wrong. That's what we were doing that game, and the Buffalo News be damned.
I'm trying to find the story I did. My favorite dateline was when I interviewed Fred Jackson. He was flying to the Seattle Seahawks. Somewhere
over Iowa or whatever.
Yeah, it was like 3,500 feet over Montana, I think we were. Yeah, that was fun. I got
what do you do when you like drive out to the Bills to do some reporting, but then you're back in the Gettsville home office writing? Do you put Orchard Park on those datelines?
Where you gathered the information. So here, I'll read it. I found it here. The dateline selection. This is how you select your dateline according to the Associated Press. A dateline should tell the reader that the AP obtained the basic information for the story in the datelined city. Do not, for example, use a Washington dateline on a story written primarily from information that the newspaper reported under a Washington dateline. Use the home city of the newspaper instead. What? All right, this is different.
And now I'm militant about this at WIBB because I came in a couple of years ago and there was a lot of what I felt was incorrect dateline usage where people in the office were writing a story based on a press release coming from West Seneca or Niagara County or wherever it was, and that would be the dateline that was used. And it got to, I think, ridiculous extents. It was people writing stories about the Olympics in, wherever they were, London, or they weren't in London the most recent time. The Bills playing in London, and we were writing stories from the office with London datelines, and I tried to push very hard to make, Buffalo, New York, the dateline that we use more often than not. And I think I've won that battle, but not everybody follows my AP style instructions.
Right. Well, we had the AP used to use Miami for Dolphins games, Dolphins home games, and that town is not Miami. It's nowhere. I don't want to say it's nowhere near Miami, but it's quite a ways outside of Miami Gardens. And when I started working at ESPN, now we had always used Miami Gardens when I was at the Boston Herald and at the Buffalo News and the Las Vegas Sun and all the different places. But the AP was stuck on calling it Miami. So when I went to, and also when I worked at the Palm Beach Post, I covered the Dolphins before I went to ESPN, and it was Miami Gardens for the Palm Beach Post. So I mentioned to my editors at ESPN, I was filing my copy with Miami Gardens datelines. They kept changing it to Miami. And I said, it's not Miami, it's Miami Gardens. I went through the whole thing. So what they did was they called the Associated Press and had a discussion with the AP, and they said, we're not changing it. We're going to keep it as Miami. So ESPN kept it as Miami because it didn't want to confuse readers, to have one set of datelines from its own writer saying Miami Gardens, and then on the wire have it say Miami, because ESPN ran the AP wire stories. So I had to lie. I was told to be wrong. I was instructed to be wrong. Somewhere along the line, the AP switched back, and now the AP does call it Miami Gardens. But weird. Or Foxborough. That's another one. Sometimes you see Foxboro. Sometimes you see it with the OUGH on it. OUGH is correct.
All right.
What?
A lot of talk about
20
datelines.
minutes of fucking datelines. Anyway.
Well, let's talk a little bit about St. Bonaventure basketball, because they are having one of the, at least at this point in the season, one of the best seasons they've ever had. They're 12-1. They've been 12-1 before, but the last time that was in the 1969-1970 season that they went to the Final Four with Bob Lanier, which means 12-1 out of conference is their best non-conference season ever since they joined the Atlantic 10 in the late 70s. They've never had a 13-game start before conference play quite like this one. And that would portend to thinking they're in at-large consideration, and they are on that bubble. I've seen bracket projections that have them as, the second A10 team getting an at-large bid around a 10, 11, 12 seed. I don't know if they're quite there yet. They're 55 in the NCAA net rankings. You probably want to be more up in the 40s to really feel good about your chances there. They don't have a quad 1 victory. They are 2-0 in quad 2 games. Providence on a neutral floor is their best win, which is a very good win, but not quite the beating another NCAA tournament type win that you really need to be considered in that. But the A10 has a lot of good teams. Dayton was ranked in the top 25. I do think the A10 is trending towards being a 2-bid league this season, and St. Bonaventure is in a good position to maybe be that second team, but they're going to have to do very well in the Atlantic 10 conference play to preserve that position.
So their best player, they have 5 players averaging double figures. Essentially, Leger Jones is the lowest at 9.8. So I'm going to go ahead and say that he's averaging 10 points a game. But Chance Moore at 16 points a game and 7 rebounds. What can you tell me about some of these guys?
Well, I'll tell you this: they're winning with defense more than anything. Defense and coaching. They're one of the best defensive teams in the country, top 40 defensive efficiency, and some of the raw numbers are even higher than that. They don't have an offensive star, although Chance Moore is the point guard, is their best player in that sense, a leading scorer. I do think their best player is probably Melvin Council Jr., a transfer they got, a Rochester kid who came in from Wagner, who maybe should have been a higher level Division I player, if not for some trouble he got in while he was in high school that had him going to a junior college. He was their best player and leading scorer in the win against Providence. Noel Brown on the inside has been really good and really efficient. They run good offense. That Mark Smith, calls a play pretty much every time down the floor, and this group has done well at doing that. They're not a great 3-point shooting team. They're not a high-scoring team. They're kind of winning with defense and not turning the ball over and being efficient. But I think the biggest reason they're having the success that they're having is they might have had more talent last year, and they probably definitely had more offensive talent in the backcourt last year and more shooting. But last year's team had problems with chemistry and culture and players not getting along. And it was a symptom of this transfer portal era where some players were getting more NIL money than others, where some players were one-year guys that didn't fit into the team as well as, or didn't fit in with the holdover players. This year's team, they all seem to be on the same page, even though they do have some transfers and do have plenty of guys that are new to the program. They all seem to get along and fit together on the court and follow Coach Mark Schmidt's teachings and the things that he wants out of them much better than last year's team did. And they're not quite as good, I think, as that team that was ranked in the top 25 and got to the NIT final a couple years ago. But they remind me of that team and the way that they play and how all the pieces fit together and how well they play under Mark Schmidt's system, which is important there because he's going to demand a certain level of play. And he does, I think, change the offense to suit the skills of his players. But he's not the type of player that runs an NBA type system and just puts the ball in his point guard's hand and says, you make it happen. He calls a lot of sets and he wants certain shots to happen on the floor, and he needs players that follow that direction and know the plays and do things and are willing to share the ball. Having 5 double-digit scorers and guys that play good team defense is kind of the perfect Bonaventure basketball type thing. And I don't know, Adrian Wojnarowski came in after this team was put together. He did have some, I think, involvement in the NIL collective and getting a few of these transfers, but his GM impact on the roster is going to be seen more on future rosters than this year's team. But it does seem like there has been a little bit of a Woj effect. I don't know if there's just some sort of chemistry or belief system that came from Woj coming to this team that seems to have filtered into the locker room and the fan base. And I think it's revitalized Mark Schmidt a little bit. I mean, you're right. He pretty much said it on our podcast that he didn't have too many years left in this NIL transfer portal era. And I think behind the scenes, he's told other coaches more succinctly that, his contract was up in a few years and he probably wasn't interested in another contract. But I think with the success that they're having and having a GM that now handles a lot of that recruiting and NIL negotiations, I think that he can just coach this team. And I think he might have a lot more good feeling, especially with the way this team gets along, and he seems to enjoy coaching them a lot more than last year's team, that I think he might be more interested in extending his run in Olean, Allegheny County beyond next season.
How might Woj's presence help when it comes to being an at-large team? And I know it's not supposed to, but when you talk about the number of bids from the A10, I mean, it's just a thought, but he has some cachet.
I think it helps maybe a little bit, but maybe it doesn't help as much as it seems. I mean, I think it kind of helps from perception. It might help with bracketology and the media, being a little more aware of St. Bonaventure and getting Woj on a podcast to talk about St. Bonaventure and getting them in that bubble discussion. But I also think that when that selection committee meets and their ADs and their coaches, that they're probably going to take that out of it. I don't know if it makes a big impact, but I think it could set up a scenario where, from the outside looking in, Bonaventure looks like it has a better case than maybe they do on the team sheets, because I think that those get looked at. They might even take the team name off of it, and they just look at the resume and the numbers and how that breaks out. And there might be a situation, maybe it's not happening with this team, but there might be a year where some of the Bonaventure Woj hype is a little higher than what they're actually doing. And I think that might be happening now. The NCAA net rankings have Bonaventure at 55 and they're 80 in KenPom, which some of that is due to preseason rankings that get baked into the system early on. And
yeah, that's what we were talking about with that MVP stuff.
Right. But they're ranked, they're not ranked in the Associated Press, but they're getting votes in the Associated Press poll, and they're probably somewhere around top 40 in that sense. So maybe the perception of people looking at them is a little higher than the computers and the numbers see that. And they're having a great season either way, and they're on that bubble either way. But there might be a situation where to people that want to look at Bonaventure as an at-large team, they might see something a little better than what their performance has been.
And the UB women, they won again today. They're now 11-0 and start Mid-American Conference play on Wednesday, which is New Year's Day. Not that that matters, but Happy New Year to everybody out there. Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, whatever you celebrate.
Well, they're playing great. They're 11-0. They've never been 11-0 before. They're undefeated in non-conference play. They're the highest scoring team in the MAC with the lowest scoring defense in the MAC. They haven't played a lot of strong teams. Had a bit of a soft schedule that's helped them get to 11-0, but they're taking care of business and romping just about every team that they play. And they're a definite contender to win the MAC. They have, Shelley Watson is maybe the best player in the MAC, and Becky Burke is a good coach who's done really well. They have a lot of other good players, some transfers that have helped them. The MAC has been a two-bid league at times over the years. It's not a bona fide multi-bid league every year. So their net ranking isn't that high because of the strength of schedule. But, there's maybe a possibility where if UB gets to the MAC final and loses, that they could maybe get into the NCAA tournament because their record is so good with this 11-0 non-conference performance. But probably not. They don't have the signature wins from non-conference play to really put them, in Sharpie on that line.
And I know you wanted to talk about the Damon men down to the Division II caliber of play. They are nationally ranked.
Not just nationally ranked, they're ranked in the top 5 in one of the national polls, and I think 6th in the other, 4th in one, 6th in the other. So consensus top 6. They've been ranked before, but they've never been ranked that high. I think the highest they've been is somewhere in the teens before that. They're number 1 in the East region, which is another place they've never really been ranked before. They've been ranked high in that poll, but never number 1. And if that holds up for the course of the season, they get to host the first round of the NCAA regionals, which is something they haven't done before. They're probably going to have to win the conference to preserve that number 1 spot, but it's trending towards the best season Damon basketball has ever had. The best start they've ever had is already where they're at, and possibly the best postseason position going into the NCAA tournament that they've ever been in before.
Well, what's the big difference for Mike McDonald's crew that they are better? I mean, they're consistently great. I mean, they've always been, but what's given them this extra push to be considered elite?
Well, I think it's similar to what I was saying about St. Bonaventure. And again, they're a very good defensive team. They have good size. They have good players at different positions. A good point guard, Justin Glover, who played at St. Joe's. But their best player, or their best players, probably aren't as good as Andrew Sisko or Sean Fasorio, Dylan Fasorio, some of the star players that they've had in past seasons. Maybe they're as good, but certainly not better. So it's not like the talent level is that much higher than what they've had in these previous years, but the way they play together as a collective, their team defense, sharing the ball, running Coach Mike McDonald's system. What's really benefited Damon is that they haven't been hurt too hard by the transfer portal. And a lot of their players are older players, and a lot of their players are guys that come in and redshirt as freshmen, and they're now in their 3rd, 4th, sometimes even their 5th year on campus and running the same system and knowing how to play together. And they have shooting, they have defense. They're just a really good team, and they putting that together on the floor. And even if the star level talent isn't, they don't have Division I bounce back players, which sometimes Division II teams utilize to have really good seasons, but they're just a really good team with depth and good coaching. I mean, Mike McDonald's been coaching a long time. He's been coaching at this level in this league long enough. I think he knows the type of players he needs to recruit and how to develop them to win at this level, because it's a little bit different than winning at Division I or Division III where he coached previously. And I wouldn't want to say he just figured that out, but I think over the years he's figured that out, and it's really coming to fruition this year. And I'll say, friend of the podcast who joined us in March, Nick McDonald, Mike McDonald's son, he graduated, and one of their other leading scorer, Dylan Fasorio, transferred out. And I was talking to Nick in the off season, kind of thinking, when Damon, maybe they take a step back, or are they still going to be good? Who's going to replace these guys? And he said, they're going to be better. This team, the way they play, the way they get along, their chemistry and their intelligence. And I thought he was just saying that, his dad coaches the team, but he's proven to be right. And they also beat UB. That doesn't count on the record, but that was something that the previous teams with, All-American Andrew Sisko didn't do. UB was better in those years too, but
Can that factor into rankings
yes, I think it does, perception-wise, especially early on. I think that helped Damon get a bump in the early rankings, and then they kept winning and they've moved up. Maybe by the end of the season, it's more about their record and the games that count on the record, but I do think that helped Damon very early in the season. The other, because a lot of these are coaches polls or they're coaches and SID polls, and the people voting in that knew that Damon beat a Division I team, and
right. Jonah, we want to do any more college hoops, or what do we want to do here? Wrap it up, or what else you got? Always have a lot of extra stuff that I don't even think to ask. That's why I always just did the open-ended, like, what else you got
we didn't
in your
get too
notebook?
much into the Bandits, which is where I'm headed tonight. I've got to leave in about an hour to beat the traffic and find a parking spot, and that's going to be a scene. The Bandits are the best team in the NL, going for a three-peat. This is their first home game, their third game of the season. They've won 2 blowout margin games. Last year they started a little slow, seemed to have a little bit of I don't know what you call it. It's like senioritis or defending championitis, where they didn't really bring their best until the second half of the season. And this year they don't seem to have that hangover. They played well from the start.
Some
And
teams, when you're really good, and this was a concern I had with the Bills a little bit, and I think maybe not having Stephon Diggs and losing some of that leadership forced them to be sharp through training camp, et cetera. But a lot of really good teams, they just want to, like, can we just skip it and get to the postseason? Like, we were just there. That's like the Sabres in 2007. It's like, let's just get right to it. Let's screw this other stuff.
But also what happens in this sport is all the players go and play in the PLL outdoor lacrosse leagues, and they play in international competitions. And that happened again this year, but it seems to me that the Bandit star players maybe got a little more rest in this offseason. They didn't have quite as many long playoff runs or tournaments or things like that in their offseason that maybe had them a little bit not unfocused, but needing to take some of the preseason and the early season to get back into indoor box lacrosse mode, where this year maybe they were a little more primed and ready to go from game one. But I also think they learned from last year that they didn't have their best game right away, and they were determined to maybe not let that happen again. Give that to 0-time coach of the year, John Tavares, for coaching that into these guys this year. But this, I think tonight, is a fan story as much as a lacrosse story. They're playing against their Pagula cousin, the Rochester Nighthawks. But it's going to be a sellout crowd, which the Bandits do sell out that building, but not every game. So there's going to be a little bit of a different energy. From what I've seen, the secondary market tickets, the cheapest ticket to get into the Bandits game tonight is more expensive than the cheapest ticket to get into the Bills game on Sunday. So it's a hot ticket with the temperature being, over 50 degrees the way it is today. I think you're going to see some of these Bandits fans out there tailgating. They're going to raise the banner into the arena. They're going to give every fan in attendance a mini banner. And if you've been to a Bandits game, you know that energy is something different. Well, it's not like a Sabres game, but it's sort of like a Sabres game, but amped up. A lot more volume, a lot more intensity, a lot more scoring, a lot more fan participation and interaction. And, it's always like that with 16, 17,000. And when every seat's full with 19,000, and this being the first time they've played here since that championship game back in June, it's, I think, going to be one of the most electric atmospheres we've seen at the arena in a long time.
Well, have fun down there, Jonah. You're not used to this. I know the Sabres did score 7 goals last night, or was it 6? Was it 6 last night? 7? Anyways, they scored a lot of goals. There was a lot of fun. You had some fun at the arena last night, but maybe 2 nights in a row might be a little bit too much for you.
Well, when the Sabres had Bandit land on ice last month, and I wish I could remember exactly which game this was because there were too many games like this. But the Sabres, they scored, I think, 3 goals in the first period. Zach Benson threw one in on a long shot about a minute in, and the other team had 2 goals coming right back. And there was a real lacrosse energy to that game. It was like 3-2 after about 10 minutes, and some long shots getting in there, and it really felt like a lacrosse game. And that was maybe it was Detroit. Who's the other team? Not the Colorado game, but who's the other team the Sabres blew the 2-goal lead to, and it was a disaster situation. It was that game.
I pick one out of a hat. I mean, it seems like it was all of them.
Yeah.
I looked up the athletics guidance on datelines. It doesn't help us out really, but it does give a little bit more finesse, or it catches the concept a little more clearly than the AP style guide. We use date lines to show we were there, even for home games. With the national, international nature of our coverage, readers could be from all over. Do not use a date line if you were not actually at that game, practice, etc. So yes, that's like the basic, like just because it happened there doesn't mean you were there. Now, I've been a little under the weather. I may not cover the Bills game tomorrow. You will notice then, if that's the case, and I don't actually attend the game, that my story will not say Orchard Park, New York, but Joe Biscaglia's will. And that's the reason why.
Now,
But there's got to be more guidelines regarding the idea of post office boxes versus actual incorporation.
I mean, maybe, but how many other colleges have these particular situations? I don't know. Now let me
Probably
ask,
a lot, I would think, because
Yeah.
a lot of like Baldwin Wallace College had its own post office. We had our own zip code, I think, and we're small, but we weren't Baldwin Wallace, Ohio.
so you don't have to have a dateline on every story.
No.
Now, where I work, Nexstar policy, I hope I'm not telling tales out of school here, but Nexstar policy is that everything has to have a dateline. It helps for the SEO and
Sure.
things get shared on our Nexstar media wire. And that's where some of these situations where I think we incorrectly used the dateline in the past have come up, because everything has to have a dateline. We're writing this press release. This is the one we choose. My opinion is that everything originating out of our WIB newsroom in Buffalo should just have the Buffalo, New York dateline, regardless of what you're writing about. That's where you're writing it. That's where you're reporting. There's some gray area with TV, because sometimes we might send a camera out to film something, but we're writing the story from somewhere else. But I think in those cases, maybe you can say that we gathered our information in a different area.
You had somebody there on the scene. I think that's
right.
I think that's fine.
But what about a live stream? There's times when maybe we send the camera and it's live streaming back, but the reporter is not there. I do think there's some gray area with that. I think it's really, you want to just, what's the clearest to the reader? If we went to that location to report the story, let the reader know that. If we didn't, don't lie to the reader. And then with Bonaventure, I don't know. I'm okay with Olean, but I don't know. Maybe we're lying to them because we're not really in Olean. You do drive through Olean, and you probably, using a internet
you drive
tower
through a lot of towns.
Yeah, probably filing through an internet tower that's in Olean. So, maybe that counts for something.
Well, I'll see if I can find something better. We'll revisit this on a future podcast. Maybe I'll find something definitive about datelines.
You should get down there and do a triple dateline.
Olean, St. Bonaventure, and Allegheny.
Right. Yeah.
Some people will argue with you about it. You say Olean, they'll tell you it's Olean. I'm sorry, it's not. That's the one thing it isn't, I think.
That's true. Geographically, it is probably the least correct one to use.
All right, Jonah, thanks for this. Enjoy Banditland tonight. Thanks to everybody out there for watching or listening to Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants.
The financial needs of a business go beyond tax and attest services. That's why CTBK goes beyond accounting services and offers outsourced solutions through their affiliation with CFO Solutions Plus. These additional services allow clients to focus on their operational and long-term strategic goals. Trust CTBK's outsourced solutions to provide cost-effective, value-added financial services tailored to your company's needs. Call CTBK at 716-630-2400. Again, 716-630-2400. Or go to ctbk.com to learn more about CTBK's outsourced solutions.